I'm going to start off by introducing myself. My name's Robert Postlethwaite. I'm a solicitor, the founder and one of the shareholders in a legal practice called Postlethwaite. We couldn't think of a more imaginative name than using my surname, so I'm afraid everyone's stuck with that for the time being. And we are specialists in employee share ownership. So what we do is help companies that come to us and they say we'd like to create some form of employee share ownership, and it might be an ownership scheme for a small number of key people in a company, or at the other end of the scale it might be ownership by all the employees of a majority stake, or even the whole of the company. So when I mention that, people sometimes say, what you mean, like a sort of John Lewis type of structure, and in fact that is kind of what we're doing. We're creating miniature John Lewises in a variety of companies throughout England, Wales and Scotland. Just to give you an idea, here are some names and logos of some companies that we've recently worked with. So these are all companies that previously were owned by their founders. The founders wanted to retire from the ownership, and for a number of different reasons, what they decided they wanted to do was sell the company to the employees or to a trust to hold shares in the company on behalf of the employees. So up here we've got some companies in some different sectors. If any of you have ever either experienced childbirth or had a partner who's been going through childbirth, you may recognise the name at the top. TENS machine, that's the one you can use as an electronic means of pain relief. Doesn't involve any drugs at all, although from my memory there's often a strong tendency to go for the drugs at the end of the day, because it's a very effective way of relieving extreme pain. But TENS care can be also a very effective form of pain relief. We've also got an IT company that advises schools on computing, an art gallery selling paintings in West London, a logistics software company, Flow Group, and an investment management company based in Oxfordshire called Wise Group. So those are just some examples of companies we've worked with recently who have gone from founder ownership to employee ownership. And what characterises all of them is that the structure they've gone for, is the employee ownership trust. Now, you've probably, many of you, come across the idea of an employee benefit trust. This uses quite a similar structure to an employee benefit trust, but it has a completely different purpose. So the employee ownership trust is a new kind of trust which holds shares on behalf of employees in a company. It was created in 2014, and what happened in 2014 was that the government introduced 2 new tax reliefs associated with employee ownership trusts. And I'm going to spend some time this afternoon talking you through those tax reliefs. I would like to emphasise that an employee ownership trust has an entirely different purpose and structure compared with those EBTs that have been used in recent years for remuneration planning. What I sometimes say is that an employee trust is a bit like a JCB excavator. You can use it for a number of different purposes. So you could use it to ram raid an ATM machine and steal all the contents. You could do that. Not a particularly wholesome purpose, use of a JCB. Or you could use it to dig the foundations for a new school, much more like it. Well, I think there's a parallel there with uses of employee benefit trusts. So you can use them for, well, you could use them, you can't do it anymore, for quite aggressive tax planning, or you can use a trust of this kind to create a new form of ownership in your company involving the employees, a very strong platform for future growth, and an exit solution for the existing owners. Okay, so the government's intention, this is going back to the days of the coalition. If anybody can remember the coalition, it was only 2 years ago, but it seems like almost like ancient history to me. One of the little known policy plans they had, which they did implement, was the idea of encouraging the growth in the UK of employee-owned companies. Why did they want to do that? Because there was a very strong belief that employee ownership would encourage greater productivity, resilience, and stronger performance. And there is actually quite a lot of evidence, academic and other observed evidence, that suggests that they were onto something with that, and that employee-owned companies do tend to perform better in a number of ways compared with all other types of company. There was also a strong belief that if companies do better, then it will be appropriate for employees who've helped to make that happen, made a strong contribution to better performance, to share in the rewards of that. So that was the policy of the government, coalition government, behind creating this thing called the Employee Ownership Trust. So what did they do? 2 new tax reliefs introduced in 2014 to encourage employee ownership. First of which was full relief against capital gains tax if you sell your shares in your company to an employee ownership trust. Second, there's something in it for the existing owners, they get capital gains tax relief. Second, there's also something in it for the employees. Once a company has become majority owned by an employee ownership trust, then its employees can receive annual bonuses free of income tax. So something in it for vendors and something in it for the employees. A little bit more about the tax reliefs later on. So the tax is important enough, but should never dominate any decision about who are going to be the next owners of your company. I thought it'd be useful to put up here some questions that were, well, not questions, but statements and questions that we often hear when we talk to company owners. So just going from left to right from the top, if I sell to a company, if I sell to a trade buyer, I'll have to stay on, and most of my sale price will be based on future profits. So the concept of getting locked into an earn-out, very common if you sell to a trade buyer. I'm concerned that a buyer won't be able to retain the essence of what makes us tick. So a buyer might actually make redundant quite a lot of the employees. That's often a worry. The culture of the company might change, and if that happens, that might damage the business of the company. I couldn't have done this without our loyal employees, and I don't want to cast them adrift, and that's often also a concern. It's the employees who know the business best. Couldn't they be the next owners? And then finally, and actually very commonly, we can't find a buyer. There just aren't buyers out there, or if there are, they can't raise the money to fund a purchase. So I don't know if this is resonating with any of you, but that's certainly what we hear a lot of when companies come to us to talk about employee ownership. So how does this compare with other approaches to succession? Well, I've put up on this slide the kind of main alternatives: trade sale, management buyout, externally funded, management buyout, vendor funded. So you sell to the management, but you would expect to wait for your money, be paid out over a period of years. Liquidation sounds a bit dismal, but actually sometimes, almost unbelievably to me, that is how some owners of quite successful businesses get some money out simply by liquidation. And then you have employee ownership, which is what we're looking at this afternoon. Okay, so back to the tax incentives. First of which is, as I've said, no capital gains tax. A little bit more about this then. Finance Act 2014 introduced capital gains tax relief if you sell a controlling interest in your company to an employee ownership trust, then you won't pay any capital gains tax at all. Your company must be a trading company, so if, for example, you're an investment company, it's not going to work. And this is the absolutely critical thing, if the employee ownership trust, or EOT, benefits employees financially, for example, if it transfers shares to them, that must be on the same terms. Now, what does that mean? Same terms means that the trustees can't pick and choose particular employees and favour them over other employees. So it means that any benefit that does go to employees, either everybody gets the same, which is actually very unusual, or, much more commonly, people get different amounts by reference to their salary, their length of service, or their hours worked, or a combination of those things. You also then have tax incentives for employees, and the possibility of employees receiving an income tax-free bonus. Now, again, that works on a same terms basis. So if you're going to pay income tax-free bonuses, either everyone's got to get the same, or people can get different amounts based, for example, on what their salary is. The company can pay a maximum each year of £3,600 to each employee, income tax-free. Unfortunately, national insurance is still payable. So income tax-free exempt, but I'm afraid the government weren't quite so generous as to include relief from national insurance in this as well. So there will be income tax-free bonuses. So what does all this look like? If you're a company owner, I've put up here this, I hope, relatively uncluttered diagram, which shows a sequence of steps. So the retiring owner, first step, sells their shares to an employee ownership trust. The company, over a period of time, will pay money funded out of its profits to the trust. That's step 2. Step 3, the money the trust receives from those payments from the company will enable it to pay instalments of purchase price to the retiring owner. So typically, the retiring owner would need to be willing to wait a period of years. Often it's around 5, but it sometimes can be more, sometimes less, depending on the company's profit and cash flow. But that's a typical period of time to wait to be paid out in full. And the final step is that, and this actually happens right at the beginning, the trust owns the company for the benefit of its employees. So I'm sure that is a bit of an oversimplification, but at the same time that is the gist of how it all works. So why would a retiring owner do this? Well, first thing, it creates a legacy, enables the business to continue. That's often very attractive. Retiring owner can realise the value that they've built up. Usually that's extremely important. Employees are often felt to be the most natural next owners. It's often the employees that really understand what does make the business tick. So there's a kind of logic to them taking over the ownership. Employee ownership makes the business very well positioned to enjoy further growth. This does allow time for management succession because it's nearly always possible for the existing owners to continue being involved in the management of the company until they've got a new management team to take over. And there's no capital gains tax. Now, I would say don't ever do this for tax reasons only. You've got to think it's the right thing for your company. But if you do think it's the right thing, then of course the ability to pay 0% capital gains tax is going to be a little bit of icing on the cake. what are the benefits for the company? Well, it's really all about maximising employee engagement and achieving stronger performance, creating a strong platform for further growth. So this very much isn't about the owners jumping ship, leaving the company with the employees, and it might just carry on as it was, or it might just gradually decline. The idea is very much that you've got a really strong platform for further growth, taking the ownership into the next generation. I think that's a very important element as far as the company's concerned. What about the employees? Well, sustainable ownership structure. This can be something that's there for the long term. Greater engagement, because if you're the owner, a co-owner, then there's a real reason for being engaged in how the company's performing, how well it's performing, or how badly it's performing. Why is it performing so badly? Often the answer to that question, to a large extent, lies with the employees. If you can tease out that information, that can help solve a lot of problems. And of course then, once the owners have been paid off, then profits go or can go to the employees after retaining what you need for reinvestment and working capital. Also, for the employees, if they then become individual share owners, they can get dividends and they can benefit from capital growth. When is it most suitable? Well, if you're confident in your company that your business is well attuned to employee ownership, you think it will work well, then that's a big tick. If to you it looks like the best succession solution compared with the alternatives, if there are alternatives, then that's another big tick. Also, it's important to get management support as well. So assuming you've got that, you've got 3 big ticks. Now, it won't be suitable for every company. Some companies will believe that it's going to be really difficult to get sufficient levels of employee engagement. Or some company owners might say, I really love the tax reliefs, I just want to get out, I don't care about all the other things. In that situation, I would say, I'm not sure if this is the right solution for you actually. You've got to really believe it's the right thing for your company moving forward. So that takes us neatly on to when is it less suitable. Doing it mainly or purely for tax reasons, not so good. If there's insufficient cash, present and future, to fund the purchase price, then that's going to be a challenge as far as the selling shareholders are concerned. Also, if you can't get the support of your management team, then that's could be a bit of a barrier as well. I would say, well, maybe in that situation, if you really, despite that, still think it's the right solution, then you might want to think about making some changes to the management team. Okay, so how do you actually do it? Some key steps. First thing is what we call design. So what's it all going to look like? How are we going to put together a plan for your company or your client's company to migrate to employee ownership? Getting a valuation is going to be an absolutely essential early stage step. What price can the company fund and over what time period? How much of the company is to be sold, bearing in mind that to get the tax reliefs it's got to be at least 51%. Who's going to run the trust? So who are going to be the trustees? There aren't really any rules about that. So you'll have quite a lot of scope to decide yourself who are going to be the trustees. And then once the trust has acquired ownership of the company, is it going to retain its shares long term, just like the John Lewis structure? Or is it going to pass them through to individual employees so that each employee has their own personal stake in the company? And then you have implementation, second stage. Very important part of that process to get revenue clearance, that tax payable for the vendors, if they do have to pay tax, is going to be capital gains tax rather than dividend income tax. And if you've got that clearance, then once you're in capital gains tax territory, and you're selling to an employee ownership trust, then of course you can claim the exemption. Putting the main documents together, for example, a trust deed and share purchase agreement, and then also very, very importantly, employee communication, so the employees understand what's going on. That's the very first stage in a really important process of working on building up employee engagement in the company so that they get the most out of being owners, as does the company. So, final slide, just a few quotes from some companies that have done this, just to reassure you that these are real companies that have gone down this route, and these are all relatively recent. So, that's very neatly taken almost exactly the amount of time. I think I've overrun by 1 minute, which does allow us a few minutes for any questions, if there are questions. Now I think there's a microphone available if anybody does want to ask a question. There's one at the back.
Hi, costs.
Costs, okay. Very, very direct, pertinent question. Altogether, I would say somewhere between, for design and implementation, the whole thing, between £10,000 and £20,000, all told, plus the cost of getting evaluation, which is the one thing that we wouldn't do.
And roughly how long would it take?
The very fastest we've done has been 2.5 months. That was for a company that really was very keen to do it very quickly, turn things around very, very fast. Usually it takes longer than that because there can be a kind of letting go process for the company owners. So I would say 2.5 minimum, typically more like 3 to 4, and actually sometimes it can take longer than that to get to the point where you're actually ready to embark on the process and ready to start letting go. Okay, let's switch over here.
You mentioned that there was some aggressive tax planning that was closed down. Was that in regards to property investment companies and passed it on to children?
No, not. It wasn't. It was in relation to employee benefit trust used for remuneration planning. So Glasgow Rangers style arrangements.
That one, yeah. But is there a way? I thought there was a way for investment companies to benefit from this style of tax planning.
I haven't come across one.
Okay.
If there is a way of doing it, I'd be very keen to learn about it. Only because I do have a personal belief that this is actually good for UK business. If people do start designing tax planning arrangements around it, then there's a risk that the legislation will be removed, and I think that will be a terrible lost opportunity for UK business. So, I would not like to see abuses of the legislation.
All right, thanks.
You mentioned that all employees had to be treated equally. What happens if you have employees who don't want to be part of it?
If they don't want to be part of it, it kind of depends on which way they could potentially become a part of it. So if they don't actually have if there's no opportunity to acquire personal shares, which often there isn't, then the main financial benefit to an employee is going to be a profit share. So of course it's always down to an employee to refuse their tax-free profit share if they don't want to receive it. Most won't. The vast majority won't, but they could do. If it's about shares being distributed from the trust, it will be the same. So we have occasionally in the past seen some employees say, well, free shares, there's got to be a catch there, so I don't want them, thank you very much. But then what usually happens is the next year, if there's another award of free shares, they then observe that actually there hasn't been a catch. So the next time round, they do then pitch in, and they've built up their confidence that it is actually an okay thing to be part of.
third question. Has there been, it's been going 3 years, has there been any market research in terms of reception of schemes, feedback from employees and employers?
I'm not aware of any. No, I think there are about 100 companies that have the owners of which have exited by selling to an employee ownership trust. That's a very approximate figure, and will be updated later on this year. I'm not aware of any research yet that's been done on the impact, but it's an interesting question.
So, what is the minimum value before? Is there a minimum value of the company before you can?
There is actually no minimum value, but there is a minimum number of employees as a ratio to the number of selling shareholders, which is two selling shareholders to 5 employees. So you've got 2 owners in a company with 5 employees, you're okay. If you've got 2 owners and 4 employees, you're too small. But there's no value limit.
Sorry, did you say that, is it dividend income that's spread by salary as a service, etc.?
Dividends amounts would be only relevant if employees have actual personal share ownership, and then it would be based on the number of shares held by each employee. Still able to use the annual income tax-free amount have gone back to £5,000 now. So as an employee holding shares, you can get £5,000 worth of dividends tax-free, and then you could also get a bonus separately of up to £3,600, also income tax-free. So two different ways of being paid tax-free. You can have both.
How do you get the shares out to the employees?
Lots of different ways. So employees could buy them. They could be given income tax relief on shares purchased. It's an entirely voluntary decision. So if they want to devote some of their monthly salary to buying shares and not have tax and national insurance deducted from that salary, just like a pension contribution, then they could do. Or they could be given free shares, which could also be income tax free if you use the right sort of arrangement, or they could be granted options. Whichever way you do it, any shares coming out of the trust have to go to all employees on a same terms basis. If you do want to have an arrangement for key employees to acquire more shares than the employees as a whole, that remains possible. It's just that those shares can't come from an employee ownership trust. So they might have to be the company issuing new shares, for example. If you want a senior management share ownership plan, then that's probably where the shares would have to come from.